This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. If you held onto your dry January pledge through last week, the rest of the month should be a breeze, right? Here's what we got for y'all. An ambitious goal from the incoming president: 100 million vaccine doses delivered in his first 100 days. Is it possible? We'll take a closer look. Then, social media sites crack down on threats of violence on their platforms. That's driven both Donald Trump and many of his supporters to look for other platforms. But first, here's what you need to know right now. President Trump could become the only president in history to be impeached by the House twice. Today, House Democrats introduced their resolution to impeach the president for incitement of insurrection following the attack on the Capitol by Trump supporters last week. The House is expected to vote on the resolution later this week. If it passes with a simple majority, it will go on to the Senate, which will decide whether to convict and remove the president. That process will certainly continue past the end of Trump's term. Over the past days, Democrats and even some Republicans have made calls to invoke the 25th Amendment, removing Trump from office. But House Republicans blocked that move today. Still, there's growing support inside the Republican Party to remove Trump now, despite having just 9 days left in his term. 22 former GOP senators wrote a letter to lawmakers today saying Congress must send a strong and clear message, not just to this president, but future presidents, that this type of behavior will not be tolerated or accepted. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi echoed those thoughts during a 60 Minutes interview Sunday.
It's not a question of let it go. We're not going to let go an insurrection in our country, an attempt of coup d'etat, so that we cannot validate the election of the next president of the United States.
Big business typically likes to stay neutral when it comes to politics, but they're making an exception for some drastic times. Some large companies are taking a firm stance against the pro-Trump rioters that overtook the Capitol last Wednesday, and looking to make sure their services aren't allowing for similar violence in the future. Stripe, who handles card payments for millions of online businesses, will no longer process payments for President Trump's campaign website. Marriott and Blue Cross Blue Shield Association say they will suspend donations to any Republican senator who voted against certification of the 2020 election. Meanwhile, some big banks like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, and Citigroup are pausing all political donations. Other companies are doing what they can to cut ties with the president. The PGA said it would no longer hold its signature championship at the Trump National Golf Club in New Jersey. In the last year, we've seen a shift in corporate America, with more companies either taking a stand or at least wanting to appear to take a stand. Last summer, many companies pledged to help fix issues like systemic racism. Now we're seeing companies condemn the violence at the Capitol. We've also seen significant steps from big tech, some of which are pretty controversial. Over the weekend, the president was permanently banned from Twitter and suspended from several other social media sites. While these moves raise questions of censorship, keep in mind it's not a violation of the First Amendment right. It's just a matter of a company's policy.
When digital services take content offline that they regard as inciting violence and thereby violating their terms of service, they're exercising their own speech rights in saying, we don't want our users and the public at large to be affected by this content, which violates our policies and arguably the law.
We've all been a little consumed with politics lately, but the pandemic is still very much a problem across the country. You can see here the 5 states with the highest caseloads currently. It's not limited to a certain region. For the last 40 days, COVID hospitalizations across the country surpassed 100,000 people. That's according to the COVID Tracking Project. As we enter the second full week of 2021, health experts say we will start seeing the results of the post-holiday surge.
I've been here 21 years. And I've seen more people pass away in the past week, in the past couple weeks really, than I almost say combined in all of my career as a nurse.
In Los Angeles, officials say a person is dying of COVID every 8 minutes. ICUs are already at capacity, forcing some EMTs to wait outside hospitals for hours.
People don't take it seriously until they're here with us, or until they're on the other line of that phone call talking to their family member for the last time. It is real, it is serious, and most of what we're seeing is preventable.
While vaccines offer hope, a former FDA official says the current rollout plan is just not working. More than 22 million doses of coronavirus vaccines have been distributed, but less than 7 million have made it into people's arms. As President-elect Joe Biden prepares to take office, he's made it clear the pandemic is a priority. In the first 100 days, Biden wants to deliver 100 million doses. Newsy's Shearer Tarlow shows how this administration could make that happen.
100 million COVID-19 vaccinations in 100 days. That's what President-elect Joe Biden promised to do once he's in office.
The Biden-Harris administration will spare no effort to make sure people get vaccinated.
The goal is ambitious, especially with early vaccine rollout missing government targets. But it is doable, according to our interviews with public health experts and former top officials.
The 100 million doses is assuming that everything kind of goes as planned.
No one has ever dealt with this kind of issue who's alive today.
So let's break down what it would take to administer 100 million doses in 100 days. When Biden enters the West Wing, 2 vaccines will have already been approved by the FDA for emergency use, with 4 others in development. If additional vaccines get the green light, the challenge of meeting this goal would be greatly reduced. The good news, vaccine development has moved at lightning speed, and the US has already ordered enough doses to reach this 100 million goal. The bad news, producing a vaccine takes time, so initially supply will be limited.
No one's ever made this kind of vaccine in quantity before. And we know from other drugs and other vaccines that we learn more about how to make them as we go along.
But this is a hurdle the new president could do something about. He's promised to use the Defense Production Act to compel companies to produce items needed to expand vaccine manufacturing capacity. And he plans to release all available vaccines, a break with the Trump administration strategy of setting half the supply aside to guarantee second doses are available.
Of course, production is only one part of this massive effort. Distribution, from manufacturers to providers, is another. The Trump administration left most of the logistics in this step up to states, setting up a confusing patchwork of plans. Along with drafting their own plans, states need to meet the vaccine's unique temperature storage requirements, recruit and train providers to administer the vaccine, set up vaccination sites, track inventory and who's been vaccinated, whether they received their first or second dose, and from which manufacturer.
I mean, we've invested billions of dollars and put a couple $100 million out into actually administering it. I mean, we need more resources to go out to states to be able to do this. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to do much of anything in 100 days.
And there's one more crucial step. Even if the US had 100 million doses available, administering them is about public demand as much as supply. People need to want to get vaccinated, and health officials have a big job to do when it comes to boosting confidence in the vaccine so that these shots actually end up in arms.
We are at risk, I would say, given the baseline rumors and misinformation about vaccines in general in this country. Fighting that is going to be a big part of our way forward.
Public health experts say this communication is especially important among communities of color who are bearing the disproportionate burden of the pandemic, but may be skeptical of public health systems due to historic and ongoing racism and discrimination.
I think that this is another case where the rich get richer. If you're plugged in, if you have your own private doctor and you're a patient within a large healthcare system, you're probably all set. But if you are not very engaged with healthcare, you're the person who could miss out on both the first and the second dose of this vaccine.
With time, the price and the speed with which scientists can produce the vaccine will increase dramatically, but we're not there yet.
As long as this virus is anywhere in the world, no American is safe because viruses know no boundaries and no borders.
Shearer Tarlow, Newsy, Washington.
Hold on to your britches. When you're back, we'll dive into Twitter's trending topics, which have been appropriately aflame over the past week. We usually try to give you a variety of items for our trending topics like, I don't know, news about the Sex and the City revival or something. But people are still talking about Wednesday's attack on the Capitol, and the fallout is far from over. Here's what's trending. Eugene Goodman is trending because of his so-called heroics during Wednesday's attack on the Capitol. In a video shared online, Goodman is alone and is seen diverting the pro-Trump mob away from the Senate chamber. At one point, Goodman puts himself between a man in a QAnon shirt and the hallway leading to the Senate chamber. To keep the crowd from the chamber, he shoved the man and lured him and other rioters in the opposite direction toward other officers. Goodman's actions gave police time to lock the Senate chamber's doors, and he's been praised for saving the lives of politicians and staffers who may have been still evacuating while he distracted the mob. Also, would you expect anything less from a man whose last name is Goodman? Come on, y'all. It's right there in the name. When a man broke into Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's office and stole her mail, he later told the New York Times, "I'll probably be telling them this is what happened all the way to the DC jail," which, as it turns out, was quite a bit of foreshadowing for him and others. His name is Richard Barnett, by the way, and here's his mugshot. Last week and over the weekend, Capitol mob arrests have trended as law enforcement charged dozens of people, including the most prominent and most visible members of that mob, like homeboy with the horns or dude who tried to tiptoe out of the Capitol with the lectern. And more arrests are likely. DC's acting U.S. attorney says that hundreds of people could face charges for storming the Capitol. Since last Wednesday, the FBI has received tens of thousands of tips. Additionally, the DOJ says hundreds of federal law enforcement officers and agents from the FBI, ATF, and the U.S. Marshal Service have been dispatched to help Capitol Police in bringing people to justice. So basically, if you storm the Capitol, jail! As you already know, President Donald Trump was unceremoniously ushered off Twitter over the weekend, and he had company. Twitter conducted a massive purge of thousands of accounts that promoted the QAnon conspiracy theory, including the accounts of former U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and Trump lawyer Sidney Powell. In a statement to NBC, Twitter said, "We will permanently suspend accounts that are solely dedicated to sharing QAnon content because of the potential for real-world violence." The purge also contributed to a loss of followers for a lot of conservatives and sparked arguments around censorship and the First Amendment and whether it applies to private companies like Twitter. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. With a number of conservative Twitter accounts being suspended or permanently shut down because of the spread of misinformation or rhetoric that's been associated with violence at the Capitol, prominent Trump supporters online are moving to other platforms that tout free speech. Newsy's Tyler Atkinson takes a look at what these platforms are and whether the migration will last.
Small social media networks like Parler and Gab, favored by some conservatives, are seeing their user base balloon in the wake of Facebook and Twitter banning President Donald Trump and some of his followers. Parler saw just over 200,000 installs last Friday, nearly 150,000 more than the day before. On Saturday, Gab tweeted that it was gaining 10,000 new users every hour. The main draw to networks like Parler and Gab is their lax hands-off approach to content moderation. Users on the platform are generally tasked with taking down offensive content as they see fit. The biggest names on the platform are mainstays in the conservative political world, like right-wing commentator Dan Bongino and Representative Devin Nunes.
Most of the narratives are election related for sure. I mean, that's the pressing issue that's drawing people into these spaces with such intensity and involvement.
After the elections, you saw more mainstream conservatives who were concerned about perceived biases of the platforms in terms of their moderation migrate to Parler, thinking that this was really just a free speech space where conservative viewpoints wouldn't be moderated. But of course, most of the content there was far more extreme and problematic than that.
People who are just conservative, maybe got a little radicalized around QAnon, are often then following these movements into these other platforms, and white nationalists are on those platforms. National socialists are on those platforms, and they are working as hard as they can to spread their message. It's against the government. They want a civil war.
Amazon Web Services suspended Parler from its web hosting services because its lack of content moderation allowed calls for violence to surface and proliferate on its platform. Parler responded by suing Amazon, alleging antitrust violations. One of the questions that remains is whether these platforms will continue to find sustained growth that came in the wake of the election, especially as more hosting services remove these fringe platforms. Apple and Google both removed Parler from their app stores. Some critics say these deplatforming efforts may not do enough to stamp out harmful mis- and disinformation that can lead to real-world violence. Some Parler users have already started looking for their next platform given the technical setbacks.
I would say there's been an invigoration of activity on Telegram, especially as there's kind of new Telegram channels that are taking in like the quote refugees from Parler. And never before has the incentive been so great for certain populations to suddenly be coordinating, especially when they feel this is the 11th hour and it's their duty to, help President Trump, fight against election fraud.
Tyler Adkison, Newsy, Chicago.
Halftime, folks. Feel free to hit the restroom, but make it quick. We might just get started without you. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi delivered an ultimatum to Vice President Mike Pence earlier today, saying he had 24 hours to begin the process of removing President Trump from office before the House moved forward with Impeachment 2.0. So, what exactly are the rules, and what's the likelihood that'll happen before President Trump is scheduled to leave office? National reporter Joe St. George breaks it down for us.
Shocking scenes at the Capitol last week turning into an impeachment debate this week, with House Democrats poised to make the issue center stage, the second such impeachment attempt by House Democrats in the last year and a half. As a reminder, here are the rules for impeaching a president. A majority in the House of Representatives must agree to impeach. After any articles of impeachment are sent to the Senate, a trial would begin there. 66 senators would need to vote to impeach to remove President Trump. Republicans control the rules and timeline of any Senate trial until the Georgia Senate runoff is certified.
Of course, the big question as we begin a new work week is, will any of this actually take place before President Donald Trump's term expires? And while the House of Representatives is poised to move quickly, potentially voting to impeach by midweek, at this point the Senate will take some time, with any potential trial not starting until there's only a few hours left in President Trump's term. It's looking increasingly likely that if a possible impeachment trial would take place, it would occur after President Trump leaves Washington.
Voice disapproval.
Democratic Representative James Clyburn of South Carolina even suggesting Democrats may wait months to send articles of impeachment over to the Senate, not wanting a Senate trial to distract from President-elect Biden's ambitious agenda, which includes COVID economic relief.
Let's give President-elect Biden the 100 days he needs to get his agenda off and running, and maybe we'll send the articles sometimes after that.
If you're wondering what the point of a post-presidency impeachment would be, well, for one, the Constitution allows for it, and it's possible the Senate, if they voted to convict, could prevent Trump from ever running for office again. Because the timeline of impeachment has become more difficult, some members of Congress are pushing for a bipartisan censure of the president that would only require a simple vote and not a trial. Still, as the Capitol gets back to work, the images of last week remain. In Washington, I'm Joe St. George.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. All positive messages will be forwarded directly to my boss. I'll make sure to respond to all the negative ones too before I block you. Earlier in this show, we mentioned how the country's distribution of COVID vaccines isn't going well. The administration fell short of having 20 million Americans vaccinated by the end of 2020. Delivering those vaccines to rural areas is an added hurdle to the process. National reporter Chris Stewart gives us a look at how people are bounding over that hurdle to ensure vaccines reach some of the most rural communities.
It's easy to live life at a distance here in Alpena, Michigan. This tiny city is hours from any major metropolitan area. And that's why now that there is a COVID vaccine available, doctors are making sure that distance isn't a problem. This pandemic is a journey.
Well, we have a precious cargo, so this vaccine is very temperature sensitive.
Brian Cross is making some of its most important trips.
We got to make sure it maintains a very specific temperature. Can't be shaken at all.
Riding shotgun in this pharmacist's car are 500 doses of Pfizer's COVID vaccine.
We kind of treat it like a baby here in the front seat and hand deliver it to each of our pharmacies.
He works for Mid-Michigan Health. The company runs a handful of hospitals in central and northern Michigan. Today, some of these vaccines are headed to the most isolated hospital in the state, in Alpena.
we're pretty fortunate in Michigan. We have a map, right at our fingertips, right? So when you look at Michigan, we're way up here.
While geography may make this area feel far away, when it comes to vaccinating, it is not behind.
Some of the first in the country to receive their second dose.
This week, hundreds of healthcare workers are receiving their final dose of the vaccine, 3 weeks after receiving their first. Like ICU nurse Katrina Farley.
My hardest part is sitting with someone when they're passing, without family there.
Do you know how many times you've had to do that?
Many.
Within the next couple of weeks, the vaccine is expected to give her 95% immunity to coronavirus.
If this is the little bit I can do to protect the rest of the people, that's what I want to do.
When handling the vaccine, the clock is always ticking. Mid-Michigan Health has one special freezer that can keep the vaccine at the desired 94 degrees below zero. They provided us this video of the vaccine being put into it.
In the freezer, it's good for 6 months. And then once it's out of the freezer in a refrigerator, it's good for 5 days.
That freezer is located about 3 hours south of Alpena. So it's up to people like Brian Cross to drive the doses to hospitals to make sure none are wasted.
It's very time sensitive, so we have to make these trips a little more thoughtful so that we don't waste any of the vaccine.
There are concerns rural communities will fall behind in vaccinating. Some don't have that special freezer like Mid-Michigan Health.
If we were on our own, a small rural hospital in northern Michigan, it would be very difficult for us to probably navigate this whole process.
Next week, Dr. Bates hopes they can start vaccinating members of the community who are at a higher risk for coronavirus complications like those over the age of 65. He's seen the power of these little vials that the world has been waiting for.
One of my favorite stories is one of our nurses here wanted her picture taken when she was getting her vaccine, and she said, I want to send this to my mother, my family, because this is telling them that next year is going to be different. And that was good. That was really good, powerful.
He's talking about ICU nurse Katrina Farley, who hasn't seen her mom in a year.
We're planning a couple weeks from now. I want to make sure we're 100%. And then I'll get together with her and do Christmas.
She says the vaccine will help her continue to care for those suffering from the virus, work she'll continue until the journey of the pandemic is done.
There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we're going to beat COVID. We are. This is going to be time. It's going to take time.
In Alpena, Michigan, I'm Chris Stewart reporting.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back with more in the loop tomorrow, same time, same place. More top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.